All right, clap sync. 1, 2, 3. All right, hello everyone. My name is Frank Rell, also known as Hercules in the community a little bit. So what I want to discuss in this video is sort of my submission, or first submission rather, for the ArtStation challenge for the Lost Civilization. So let me bring up the briefing right here. So on ArtStation, there is a game environment level art challenge that's going on, and what I want to do is kind of like talk about my pipeline a little bit and sort of my design and stuff going forward for each week and the work I've done. Real quick though, I'll kind of cover what the challenge is for this first week. Basically, for this one that I'm a part of, it's the real-time game environment for game engine. So for me, I'm picking Unreal Engine 4, and I have to create a fully rendered environment based on a concept art that was done in a previous challenge. And I chose the work from Leo Amarel. Hopefully I'm saying that right. This is his submission here. It's this really awesome sort of camel theme, amethyst, jeweled, ancient city sort of set in the desert. You can see sort of like desert oasis over here. Some large sand dunes in the background there. One thing about this environment though, if I jump into Unreal Engine, this is what I have so far. I'm going to kind of cover what I've done in my pipeline in a minute, but the idea for my submission here is I'm only going to cover the front half of this sort of concept. Is this, city here. In the background, it has this massive city here, and just to keep the project under scope, I'm not going to be able to do all that. This project only lasts 8 weeks, or this contest. So I really want to focus down on my scope, and I'm also going to be doing a more realistic approach to it rather than stylized. So I really want to just focus on one area, and that's sort of this main area here. And so what I've done is I've sort of changed a little bit of the story to match why it is just this part here and doesn't have the rest of the city that goes along with it. And I've written it here a little bit. We can actually go over sort of his view of it. Let me go to my submission. So this is a quick quote from Leo. Their civilization came to an end when the last of their king tried to reach immortality doing a magical ritual at the time that the greatest stars were aligned. On this day, a great magic burst, engulfed all of the desert in a big sandstorm, and the magical cataclysm is still raging ages later. Couple of changes that I'm going to be making is basically this temple is separate from the rest of the kingdom, or rest of the city, if you will. It's actually quite far away from everything, because the idea is the ones who live here are sort of the scholars and the ones who study these gemstones that are found around. And in my environment here, I plan on adding those, and that's sort of what these large structures represent. Will be rocky amethyst and stuff like that. There'll be a lot of blue values and glowing gems and stuff like that. But go back to this. Basically, people would pilgrimage to this land, to this temple, and offer trade or basically say, hey, we've made this great journey to worship, the camel god or whatever they worship, and then they would offer gems in return for making that journey. Or sometimes the king himself would offer up, say, who will make this journey to pilgrim here and bring back some of the riches, and then they will get to keep some, and so stuff like that. It's kind of like a job for the king, but the king would stay in his own time until one day he did make his own journey when they've discovered sort of like the secret to immortality, and that's sort of the story behind why as everyone in this temple kind of vanished, and sort of the city itself will be left basically completely abandoned, and everything is just sort of in a standstill. So going back to what I was saying about making it realistic, I'm not going to have it look destroyed, right? I'm going to reference the concept art as much as I can. I'm going to create all of this to make it look like that in a realistic setting. And he also has sort of a little bit more detailed sheets of how everything might look, which is great. I'm going to reference those as much as I can. But what I was saying is I don't want it to be basically destroyed in any way, but I will have it covered in sand. So just like sand that just kind of swooped in and then left. So just untouched, large sand dunes and stuff like that. So that's kind of what a lot of this represents here. I don't have a material for it yet. This is just some basic thing that was in UE4 already. But enough about the sort of setting. Let's talk about what I've done for this first week and where I'm going. So the first thing I did setting this environment up, I worked with BSP brushes, and I made a very simple block out. And then after that, I've gone into 3ds Max here, and I've started to create some more detailed more detailed meshes that represent the concept a little bit closer, but still isn't too detailed. Like that's an export. This is the actual topology one. You know, a couple hundred polygons, pretty simple, just basic shapes. Like this is supposed to be the camel's head, but there's no detail there yet. It's just sort of get the idea of what this environment really looks like once it's sort of filled in with all the main core shapes to it, right? Because when you look at it in just basic, you know, if this was just a square, that's a rectangle sort of thing, you can't really see what's in the negative space, right? Like what can I put here, what's going to bounce off things and stuff like that. So I'm going to fill it a little bit more closely to the concept and then move on from there. So that's what I'm working on now. I was actually hoping to be done with that before I made this video, but I was a little bit slow over the weekend. So this weekend I'm hoping to kind of pick things up a little bit. So we covered that. Let's see here. The landscape, I'll talk about that a little bit too. I've used the UE4 landscape sort of settings or whatever to sort of set this up first. But what I plan on doing is switching that over completely to 3ds Max and creating a base mesh. Because what I want to have that I talked about in a little bit of the concept is this environment is kind of plopped down in the middle of, like, you know, really just sprawled out desert with a lot of sand dunes. And if I bring up a concept real quick, I can talk about that a little bit too. So here's one, you know, these really large sort of sand dune areas. And the reason I want to do this in 3ds Max is it has a lot of these sharp edges that I want to capture, these really tall sort of sandy dunes. And I feel like I can best do that in 3ds Max rather than using the landscape material. I also don't have multiple materials, as you can see from, like, say this one. These sand dunes are just, you know, one flat material. So I'll use Substance Designer. I'll create a sand material and kind of put it across the whole thing, and then use Max to sort of build everything up. In this area here, once I get everything filled in, I plan on using just a simple, you know, like sort of sandy sandstone material that kind of crosses over all this stuff, and then just sort of put sand all over it and stuff like that. And with Max, using like just one big sand mesh, I can come in here and then sort of just the areas that I want to sort of bring up and lower and stuff like that, I can easily affect that. Because I've also been building this in 3ds Max as I'm building in UE4, because I can export it back into here exactly where it is, so I can sort of have a really good idea where everything is. And it's a really good workflow, actually, between Max and UE4. So really happy about that. But that's sort of like what I've done for this week and where I'm going to continue to go. See, I've already have several brushes here, or not brushes, static meshes, and I want to continue just building on top of that, sort of getting the core areas here mapped out. So this front area here isn't in the concept, right? So I have to kind of like envision what that would look like based on some other work that he's done right here, you know, kind of taking these and sort of creating something off of that. So I think that kind of covers everything I wanted to go over the first week. As for the rest of the pipeline, I plan on using Substance Designer and Painter for the most part. So 3ds Max, Substance Designer, Painter, maybe the Quixel suit if I have something that just I want to apply something quick to it. But I think for the most part, everything will be done in those two. I like the pipeline between those two software packages and UE4. I don't think there's much else to talk about what I've done for this week. It's pretty basic, you know, and I've covered the challenge itself. So yeah, I think we're good for this first week, and I'll probably make a video every week kind of just going over what I've done. I'll get more in depth in sort of the workflow a little bit for some of the higher polygon. Like I plan on making everything a high poly, baking it down to low poly. I feel like a lot of the detail though will be done in Substance Designer and Painter rather than modeling a lot of the detail, like with a lot of the ancient text and rune that might be on stuff. I can bring up another concept. Let me find something here I got. This is kind of like maybe an interior or something. I mean, it has like these really interesting pillars with Egyptian details or something that will go along the lines of the actual theme of the environment. If I go back to Leo's real quick, it has all these really cool details, but instead of trying to model this out or sculpt it in like Mudbox or something, that'll be done in specifically probably just in Painter. So I'm pretty happy with the way it's looking. I'm really kind of excited about seeing how this turns out. So I guess thanks for watching and stay tuned for the rest of it. Take care, guys.